Hey, welcome to the Climbing Lifer podcast. And this podcast is really about longevity in climbing. I always like to say it's for climbers who have made 40 trips around the sun, want to make a lot more, but want them to be filled with climbing too. And I'm your host, Don McGrath, and thank you so much for joining. And I'm so super excited about this episode. I've got on the line joining us today for the live stream and in the podcast, Matt Samet. So Matt he was an early route developer in rifle, has done mountaineering, has done bold trad stuff in El Dorado and other places. I didn't realize, but Matt's written several books, and I want to get a little bit into that. He's an editor at Climbing Magazine, just a great all-around funny kind of guy. So welcome to the podcast, Matt.
Thank you, Don. Thanks for having me.
You betcha. And I really didn't know you had written so many books until I went on Amazon or Goodreads and started seeing all that you write. But
well, no one buys them, so it's easy to miss them.
Well, because when you're an author, that's kind of it, right?
That's kind of how it goes, right? Yeah.
But again, nonetheless, we keep writing them. That's the insanity
as well.
But one of the things that you write that I really have really gotten a kick out over the year is Crusty Corner, which is a column in Climbing Magazine, I believe. And it's really funny, but it can also be controversial. So I'd love to know, what was the genesis of Crusty Corner?
So I've worked at climbing I started working at climbing in 1990s. I started writing for climbing in 1996. And in 1997, I started writing a column for them regularly called The Sporting Life. And then since then, I've kind of come and gone from climbing, I think 3 different times. So this is my 3rd time back as a desk editor, basically a full-time employee. And I started back doing that about 3 years ago. And when I started, I was like, I hadn't written a column in some years. And I just sort of felt like, I don't know, something to do. We're always looking to seed our website with content. So the Crusty Corner is just on climbing.com only. And actually now it's behind a paywall. You have to join the Samet membership to get it. But I just thought, I don't know, I'll try my hand at writing a column again. So that was starting in spring 2017. Not that I feel like I have anything great to say or that I should have anything great to say, but I like to write. So it provides an outlet for me.
So where did the name of the column come from, Crusty Corner?
So my previous column was The Sporting Life. And then I had a column for Rock and Ice called Tales of Sickness, like not illness, but like sick, bro. And this one, I don't remember. The first one I wrote, I think, was when my health was kind of bad. And it was something about doing this route despite my bad health. It was actually pretty somber column. I don't think many people read it. It had this dark photo. But I was like, at this point, when I wrote it, I think I was 45, and I was like, I think I've been doing this long enough to have earned the title of being a cruster, like an old cruster. And I was like, let's just call it Crusty Corner. I just threw it out there, and our digital editor Kevin's like, yeah, sounds good. So, maybe if I was 25 and writing Crusty Corner, people would be like, this guy's so young. He's got his whole life ahead of him. Why is he so, crusty? But
you might be saying take a shower if you were 20, or
yeah,
just
one of those scrapers, like
to bathe or something. But yeah,
exactly. Get to scrape the barnacles off. So I don't know. It just seemed appropriate, I guess, for my age and where I'm at in my climbing career. I've been climbing now, pretty much nonstop since I was 15, and I'm now 48. So that's 33 years of climbing. So it just seemed apropos.
There was one of those articles I just refreshed my mind with last night as I was preparing for today, and it was like 10 super Gumby things and how to stop them or something, right? It was really funny, like putting the rope over your shoulder and, wearing all kinds of gear at the gym. And it was just really, really funny. Mm-hmm. But it got a lot of comments and not all good comments, so I think you put yourself out there as a writer. Mm-hmm. Some people are going to like it. Some people aren't. But that's the way and so what's been your experience with that? That must've been kind of interesting for you.
Yeah. Oh, it's interesting you picked up on that one. Yeah. I think it was something like the 10 signs you're a perma Gumby. Yeah. Some people laughed. I think people who, like us, have been climbing a long time and have seen this kind of demographic shift could relate to it. But people who probably newer to the sport or just sort of felt personally attacked. You know, the idea was to sort of make fun of these people in the gym that don't really, I mean, we've all been Gumbies, right?
Yeah.
But there's this like learning curve and an apprenticeship. And if you're not willing to serve those, you can kind of stay stuck in these ridiculous habits. So I think I was just sort of calling out some of that I've seen at the gym, you know, and not in the nicest way. So people were pretty upset that, you know, like how people put the rope over their shoulder to climb to the first bolt. I was like, oh, you should put it around your neck and hang yourself. And people are like, no suicide jokes. That's not cool. And it's like, well, I mean, if you can't joke about anything, you shouldn't. I mean, if you can't joke about everything, the way I look at it is you can't joke about anything, right? I mean, with humor, or at least trying to create humor, it has to be, at a certain point, it has to be transgressive. Whether or not other people laugh or not, you know, you can't control. But if you're not willing to take risks, you're not going to even get one laugh. So I guess that's how I look at it. I mean, yeah, it sucks, right? Making a suicide joke probably isn't the best. I have had friends who've killed themselves, but at the same time, you should look at the title. It says "Crusty Corner."
But you know,
it's like it's a joke.
As I read those comments, that's the exact thought was good. It's like you poke your, you know, in comedy.
Mm-hmm.
Always, because I teach comedy as for when I teach people to speak. You have to incorporate comedy when you speak, right?
Mm-hmm.
And someone must suffer. That's a cardinal rule of comedy. Someone must suffer.
Sure.
And the best person to suffer is you, right? Mm-hmm. And you do that just by saying crusty corner. So to me, that kind of sets the tone that this is going to be a tongue-in-cheek. Hey, I poked my fun at myself. So I read those comments, and I certainly can understand the perspective, but you know, I certainly really enjoyed the article. So.
Oh, well, thank you, Don. I appreciate that. Yeah, I think the 10th one on the list was something making fun of myself. Like, you know, you're perma-Gumby if you're like or maybe it was another one I wrote, but yeah, I always try to do that to some degree. Yeah, I mean, I think earlier in my career, I used to get upset when I get the angry letters and the angry emails, and then I just stopped caring. I mean, basically, I just don't care. I mean, it's a huge world out there. It's chaos. It's complex. Everyone has their opinions. You know, you can't go through life caring what other people think. So I just do what I do. And
I think you poke at things that make us think. I saw another article was about free soloing. Mm-hmm. And, you know, it was something to that free soloing sucks, but we're going to cover it anyways. Right.
Oh, right.
And I thought it was a really good treatment and exactly point on. And, you know, but you're not afraid to take those subjects on that other people are like, well, I might offend some people. They might, you know, feel this way or that.
Sure.
And I think that's what we need. You know, we need to be understanding that there are different opinions and perspectives, but we should be talking about them anyways, especially in the role as a writer.
Yeah. I mean, if you can't, when you're writing, write how you honestly feel about something, then your writing's not going to be engaging. You know, your goal isn't to please people. It's to entertain people. It's to engage them, you know, and so whether or not they agree with you is almost immaterial. It's whether or not you pull them onto the page. I mean, that's how I look at it. Like, you know, I read stuff online that I might not agree with, but if I like the writing, I'll read the whole piece. I'm sure you probably feel the same way.
Well, your form of humor, you know, appeals to me. I always get a chuckle when I see your feed. You know, we're in the similar age, although I was kidding the other day, like you haven't joined the 50 club. So, mm-hmm. You know, you're still got some things ahead, but now I want to talk a little bit about, your climbing. Mm-hmm. So, you know, you started climbing in New Mexico, I think it was Albuquerque, and then you moved to Boulder. And I think you were pretty influential in the early days of rifle. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. What was that like?
I mean, I don't know if I was influential so much as I just happened to be there and I was psyched to put up roots. I mean, it was pretty amazing, you know, rifle. So I first went there in fall of 1991 when I moved to Boulder to study at CU. And I remember, you know, I moved to Boulder because I'd been to Boulder before and I was like, there's rocks right there. There's a college, done deal. And I remember going into the Boulder Mountaineer and I think someone had some photos of Pete Zoller and Philip Benningfield's New Roots in the Wasteland. So this was like the Beast and Never Believe. I think maybe Dan Hare had some photos that he'd taken of them. And, you know, he had some slides out on the counter. And I was just like, whoa, you know, what's that? It just looked like European limestone. It was sort of crazy to think because at that point, there just wasn't that much sport climbing in the US. You know, there was like Smith Rock, the new, Shelf, Penitente, some stuff in New Mexico, some stuff at Waco. You know, it wasn't, sport climbing as we know it now didn't really exist. American Fork, you know, early steep area, but obviously much more fractured rock. And I just remember going out there, and we drove into the canyon. It was the Labor Day weekend. You know, we went out for a 3-day weekend in 1991. I remember driving to the canyon. It was a full moon. And, you know, you couldn't see the rock because it was dark, but the moon was out. So you could see the silhouettes of the walls. And I just remember thinking, if this rock is even remotely climbable, this place is going to be amazing, because you could see these kind of sweeps, you know, these parabolic walls and these huge concave caves, and you know, it was a really narrow canyon. Everything was compact and dense. And I remember like waking up the next day and yeah, going down there to climb on the handful of routes that had already been established, and just looking around and being like, well, this seems like going to be a very important place in American rock climbing. You know, so from that point on, I think I bolted my first route that fall, which was like the Specimen, kind of out left of the meat wall. And then in that spring, I think my second route was Fluff Boy. But, you know, there was a really early crew. There was not that many of us, probably no more than 10 or 20, kind of going out from Boulder regularly. Some people were coming from other places like Salt Lake. Scott Fry was there from California. But not that many people knew about it early on. So it was just a real, it was kind of a feeding frenzy. You know, you could have your pick of the best lines in the canyon. So it was a pretty cool time. And there just weren't that many people there either. And, you know, it was a different area in land management too, when you could still just kind of bolt and no one really said anything or knew anything. Yeah, it was pretty cool.
So who else was there? You said Scott Fry, anybody else that we might?
I mean, I think some big drivers of the development early on, you know, it was Mark Tarrant and Richard Wright who kind of got the ball rolling with putting up the 8th day, bolting it and establishing it. Then they, I think, told Pete and Philip, you know, Kurt Smith, Mike Pont, Colin Lance and Jim Hall. I'm trying to think of who else was the Ruckman brothers, you know, Brett and Stuart, Gordon Douglas and Mindy Shulak were coming from Salt Lake. You know, who else? I mean, there were people climbing there then, like Hank was climbing there and Bobby Bensman. But in terms of putting up routes, I think that was a lot of the people I just listed. I mean, like Kurt Smith was, you know, amazingly prolific and amazingly fast. And he liked to bolt ground up too, which almost made the most sense there at that point, because a lot of the walls didn't have that many established routes. And it's a real pain in the butt to go around it, rifle and wrap in, because you got to kind of come off these trees and come down these rocky, nasty slopes just to get in over the lip. But I think I think he did something like, do you know Movement of Fear on the anti-fill wall?
Oh yeah, that slopey thing. Yeah.
Yeah, slopey Desperate 12C. I think he bolted it and red pointed it in an afternoon or something like that. Like ground up bolted it super fast, brushed it a little bit, sent it. You know, and Colin Lance was really fast and prolific too. Like at the Arsenal, you know, which is just this roadside cave that everyone thought was too loose to climb in. He put in a whole host of routes in those early seasons, you know, and obviously it's one of the main hangs at Rifle now.
Yeah. Well, we're going to want to give a shout out to one of our sponsors, Sharp End Publishing. And Sharp End Publishing is a guidebook company by climbers for climbers. They've got tremendous guidebooks, and they've got to Moab, one of my favorite, Shelf Road, right in my own backyard. Just absolutely fantastic. New York City bouldering. So if you've got a trip planned, go to sharpendbooks.com and look to see what they have for guidebooks. They do a fantastic job of carrying only the best guidebooks with climbers in mind. And if you don't have an upcoming trip, well, go there anyways, and maybe it'll inspire you to have a trip, because one of the best things about climbing is trips. And Matt, actually, you were the first person that I interviewed doing research for Vertical Mind.
Mm-hmm.
So remember that? I was just looking back at our interview.
Was it 10 years ago? It was more now, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think it was 2012. I think we did
okay. So it's like
around then. I think we did our interview, and
yeah.
And you said yes. I floated something out there, and I don't know, it was Mountain Project or something, and
Mm-hmm.
you said yeah. And so thank you. Either were very kind or were really a bad judgment. You had really bad judgment, one of the two, I'm not
A
sure.
little of both.
A little bit of both, but I thank you because that research really helped Jeff and I, to be inspired to come out with Vertical Mind. Sharp End Publishing actually produces Vertical Mind. So I'm very, very indebted to Fred and Heidi Knapp, who run Sharp End Publishing very selflessly. So is there a route, back to climbing. So is there a particular route in rifle that kind of typifies or has a special meaning for you? I'd love to hear a story.
I mean, I think the one I'm most proud of is maybe Fluff Boy down kind of across the road from the Wicked Cave, just because I think it was the first sort of properly steep classic route I'd bolted. I'd been putting up routes in New Mexico and some stuff, some of that other stuff at Rifle. But I just remember it was a real learning experience for me because it goes out this cave, so there's no way to wrap bolt it. So I sort of got some bolting tips on going ground up from Jim Surratt, who was really experienced. Yeah, Jim Surratt was another early, Chris Hill, Jim Surratt, were other early developers at Rifle. But I got some tips on ground up bolting, and I remember I think I drilled it in a day, blade by my friend Ryan Sappenfield, and it was like a snowstorm, and it was too cold a day to climb, so I bolted it. I remember in one push, and he was stuck on belay for something like 3 hours while I did it. Basically I was just drilling a bolt ladder, but there's some gear here and there on that thing, and I probably used some hooks and stuff like that. But yeah, I just remember I bolted it, probably cleaned it another day, came back and started climbing on it. And it was just sort of one of the first properly steep, I think sort of exclusively cave style routes at Rifle, and really just sort of embodies that Rifle style with big blocky pinches and stuff like that. So, and it's remained an enduring classic, people still appreciate it. So I feel pretty proud of that climb.
I wish I could say it was an enduring classic that I've been able to do, but that's not the case. But Rifle has made a big difference in my climbing. So no matter how you feel about Rifle, I think it can do nothing but make you a better climber.
Yeah, it'll make you strong, right?
And the community, it's one of those things. I've met a lot of people who are like, yeah, I went to Rifle, I didn't like it, it was hard, and I never went back. And for me, it's an acquired taste. It's kind of like a whiskey that you may have to sip it a little bit. For me, it took me a few weeks before I was really having fun. And
sure.
I think that's kind of the nature of that style of climbing.
Yeah, I mean, the routes just aren't that obvious, and they're quite powerful and thuggy. So you have to sort of apprentice yourself to that rock for sure.
So I was reading something the other day, I think it was an article that you had written, and you said you kind of got bored with sport climbing. And I think it was 1990 or something. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I read. You said I kind of got bored with it, and you moved on to start doing stuff in Eldo and doing some bowl descents. Tell us a little bit about that period and who you climbed with, and maybe who were some of your mentors.
I think that probably would have been the late 90s or something. I think at that point I'd been at Rifle, kind of exclusively. I mean, I'd climbed other places, but that's where I'd put a lot of my energy. Yeah, and I think I'd gotten a little burned out. I sort of hit the wall with where my abilities, would let me realize a sense. There was sort of a stagnation, I think, with new route development. There might have been a moratorium at that point, or the Rifle Climbers Coalition hadn't quite formed. Yeah, so there just wasn't much left to do. I think I had a handful of things that I could have done, but they were either going to be campaigns or they were just too hard, or I just wasn't that interested. So I got more into climbing kind of in Eldo and in the Flatirons. And at that point, there was a bolting moratorium in the Flatirons that had been in place since 1989. You couldn't even update hardware, and you certainly couldn't put up new routes. So it's just sort of inspired by watching that movie Hard Grit. I think a lot of people were. It was a pretty seminal movie at that point, showing what could be done with difficult climbing if you rehearsed it and rehearsed the gear and were maybe willing to fall, but always in the back of your mind was the goal that you're not really going to fall. So I think during that period, we did a handful of ascents in the Flatirons, mostly on Seal Rock. It was me and my friend Steve Dekoff. He was a sort of dyed-in-the-wool trad. And was sort of opposed to sport climbing just on principle. I think he was just sort of like a stubborn old trad dude. I mean, we all know people like that, right?
Crusty.
He was crusty, and he was crusty. I think he would have been the first to admit it. So I climbed a lot in Eldo with Steve, Michael Gilbert, Annie Whitehouse, kind of just just repeating, like, all those routes from the 70s and 80s that are still very bold to this day. I mean, quite hard. I mean, 511 RX in Eldo is like a pretty serious, a very serious undertaking. Like, the gear's inobvious, there's loose holds, there's lichen everywhere, the line's not obvious. It's like you don't get on them if you're going to be at your physical limit. So I think did some of that, and also on Seal Rock, the south face, which is now a sport climbing area, which is what it should be. But at that point, because you couldn't bolt, we're like, what if we applied these head pointing tactics to these climbs? So 3 routes went in there in that style. One was ground up, like a 511, then a 513 head point, and then a 512 head point.
Is there one route that kind of brings that period to light on you, or that reflects that period? Any one route stand out?
I mean, I think it's probably the route Primate, which is like a 13A or B or something, kind of in the middle of the wall. I mean, at that point, right? I mean, if you go up to Seal Rock today, there's like bolts and chain draws and chalk everywhere, and it's indistinguishable from any other sport area. I mean, it's a special wall, but you go up there and you're like, cool, I can try these routes and fall and push myself, but at that point there were no bolts on the wall. There was only an old set of anchors that Colin Lance had drilled with Chip Ruckerber and Chris Bay right before the moratorium, that's on top of what Thunder Muscle is now. So you have to like solo around, rig these weird giant anchors with long static ropes coming over the lip, just a top rope, try to find directionals on the wall because it's really overhanging. So Primate was like a multi-day project, just to rig it, suss it, learn it, see what the gear possibilities were. And I think that really exemplified the style. And I wasn't 100% sure that I was going to lead it up until the day that I led it, because I kept not being able to find satisfactory protection through the second crux. Basically it's 512 up to this undercling brake that you can load up with cams that are okay. I mean, they're probably fine. And then you have to punch it like 15, 18 feet off of that to this knee bar. And then above the knee bar, there's like an exit crux. Now it has a bolt there. And with the bolt, you're just like, if I pump out, I fall. But there were no bolts on this route. And I just couldn't find any gear to protect that upper section above the knee bar. And you get this undercling and this crystal. And you got to go to this crimp. And the crystal is still there years later. But, it's one of those embedded cobbles that you're like, this could pull out of the matrix. You just don't know. It's obviously stood the test of time. So it's just one of those things where I was like, well, if I can't find any gear that I feel like I could at least like lower on if I get gripped up there, I'm just not going to do it, because at that point you're just free soloing 513. But Steve, I think, suggested, what if we try some Big Bro? So I reached out to Malcolm Daly, who's then, the owner of Trango. And I was like, do you have any Big Bro seconds? And he was very gracious and he sent me some. So I took the green Big Bro. I'm not sure what size it is. I actually don't have the piece anymore. I loaned it to Matt Siegel to repeat the route, and he still has it. But I took it up there and I was able to like cam it against this jug that you're resting on, and this little lip that sticks out, like that much, like 3-4 inches, just like a little, basically like the eaves of a rain gutter or something like that, with not much to it. And I kept playing with it on top rope, and I finally got it to stick in there. And then we filled a haul bag with rocks and threw it off onto that piece, like using a second rope. And a couple times it walked out. I don't know if it ever failed, but a couple times it, kind of walked out of the horizontal crack. And then I finally got it situated such that it didn't budge when we dropped the haul bag a couple times. I was like, well, okay, I think that's good enough. And so I think
it's a scientific method for climbers. Just, fill the bag with rocks.
Throw it up. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, who knows how many pounds of rocks were in there, if it was lighter than me or heavier. I have no idea, probably lighter, because who wants to haul up, over 150 pounds of rocks. But it held. And then I think I pulled the rope basically and let it that day. I let it ping point style. But because that Big Bro had to be pre-placed, I just left the rest of the gear in too. So, I don't know. I've since been back. I repeated the route again this year. Where now it's a mix of bolts and gear, and it was nice to repeat it and to feel like pretty safe.
Wow, I'm sure that was thrilling. Standing there making that decision or choice, I guess, that you probably was a pretty weighty moment.
Yeah, yeah. I think a lot of went into it, a lot of preparation. I was up there with Steve and my girlfriend at the time, Haven. There's just the three of us. I mean, it was this kind of quiet gully full of ferns, different experience than it is now for sure. Not guaranteed perfect health for all of our lives. I mean, we think we are, and we feel like we're entitled to it until suddenly we realize, oh, we are not at all. So, yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's like, if you're a climber, you're going to keep climbing no matter what. I mean, I've had friends who passed from cancer, and a lot of them were climbing as long as they could, even while they underwent chemo. Like, you got to climb.
Yeah, it's one of the things that keeps us going. I kind of give another sponsor shout out. This one's to me. I'm one of the sponsors.
Oh, there you go.
Hey, I'm putting the show on. It's my show, right? So this is my first book, 50 Athletes Over 50. And I think it's relevant to this conversation because the people I interviewed for this book, they were from all different sports, but they were all over 50. And many of their stories were about overcoming adversity, whether it be some kind of uh, some kind of bad bacterial infection that had them lose a leg, or whether it's some kind of addiction problem or injuries or something. Every one of them had a way to be resilient. So that really is, I think, a key. And also this compulsion, this joy of the movement that we have, right? We just love that movement, whether it be cycling or running. And for us, it's climbing. That tapping into that joy of movement is just some of the lessons that I wrote about and learned from the 50 Athletes Over 50. And so I think that's really relevant to our discussion today, which is about, how to keep going. Any tips that come to your mind is what have been key for you? And say you've been over 30 years now, right? You started in 86. So here it is, 2019.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the key is that you should not compare yourself to younger you ever. I think that's a recipe for disaster. I mean, I know, yeah, and I think that you should always be seeking new challenges. I mean, I think those are the two things. I mean, like for me, I don't even like to repeat routes in the gym. Like once I've done them once, I don't go back to them, even if there's training value in them. And I think that's one thing that has kept me going, is that I'm always seeking out new terrain and new challenges, regardless of the grade. And that can be at the gym. It can be, oh, they just put up a new set of problems in the cave. I'm going to go try those. I think that's a big part of staying psyched and of the mental component, which is probably the most critical part in a way, because if you're not fired up to do your activity, you're not going to invest yourself in trying to challenge yourself. You're just going to sort of wilt, I guess. Yeah, and I think the other one is just listening to your body, not comparing yourself to the younger you, but just comparing yourself to how you feel at the present. It's like, I don't actually know if I'm stronger or weaker than I was 25 years ago. I may be stronger, but that's because I've also dedicated myself to training to maintain and improve my strength. Whereas 25 years ago, I didn't really have to, right? I was 23 years old and I could just kind of climb and stay fit at the rock. And I didn't have a mortgage and 2 kids and a full-time job and all that other stuff. But yeah, I think just not bemoaning the passage of youth, but just focusing on what you have wherever you are. I mean, I think that's a big part of it.
One of the things I've grown to appreciate and just being involved in climbing, and the things that makes you do, like eat right, do things to stay flexible, the things that you have to do in order to pursue the passion, is you kind of look around at other people your age and you're like, I think this has been good for me, right?
Yeah.
Just in the grand scheme. So that motivation to do the things that you enjoy, it has some side benefits that are pretty significant.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, I want to keep doing it. What do I need to do to keep doing it? You start doing your own research. Yeah, you start talking to other climbers your own age. I mean, it's funny. I climb a lot at the Boulder Rock Club, and I go in there pretty early in the morning, before work, climb, and then I usually go to the weight room to do some training stuff. When I go into the weight room, most of the people in there are like my age or older. And, it's because we're all hanging on. We all want to hang on to what we have, So I think that's another big part of it. It's just like, it's training, like, not necessarily age specific training, but training, because you're, as a climber, and as any sort of athlete, your muscular power diminishes, right? Is it past 40 or something, you start to lose power? Yeah, but you can address that. I mean, like I have a moon board here at my house, and I feel like I'm stronger than ever because of it. You know, whereas if I was just like kind of going to the gym and climbing and this and that, yeah, I might be losing like half a letter grade every year. But I think if you are systematic about it and smart about training, I mean, look at Ben Moon. He's what, 52, 53 now, and he's, you know, close to doing that 14D. That's kind of been a lifelong project.
Right.
You know, did a 14C like a year or two ago. I mean, still climbs like B11 on the moon board. I mean, there's obviously it can be done, right? Bill Ramsey, 59, just did a 14A.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the key is just consistency and being systematic. You know, I mean, it's not like when you're in 20s, you can be kind of, if you're in your 20s and you're kind of naturally talented climbing or strong, you can be kind of haphazard about it and still see results. But that starts to change, I think, once you hit your 40s. And
Yeah. I think I remember reading an article that you wrote. I think it was you were working on something in Staunton. And you said you basically never trained, but you were proud of yourself for actually training for that route. So I don't know when that was, but so there's been a shift for you. I think you've come to some kind of a realization that to stay doing what you need to do, what you want to do, you know, you probably need to start investing in some training. And so how about, let's talk about what does your training consist of?
So actually that article, yeah, I did that route earlier this year, but I started training like basically for the first time in my life. I started training a year ago, and I got a training program from Nina Williams, who obviously really knows her stuff. Super talented climber, very strong, has really put her time in, you know, training for competitions and, you know, hard trad climbing and high ball bouldering. And we're all down in Cayman Brac a year ago now and climbing together. And there was this route that John Burns had bolted on the Dixon's Wall. It was an open project called In Vino Veritas, and like was done there with her and James Lucas and a few other people. So James went up first, and I went up. And we kind of like sussed out the moves, couldn't do them, and then Nina pulls on and just like hikes the thing, flashes the first ascent of it. And then I tried it again a couple more times that trip and still couldn't do the move where you sit up in these terrible little holds and jump for this Waco. And I was like, Nina, what do you think I need to do? And she's like, you need more power. She's like, you can hang on forever, but you need to be able to jump and have some snaps. So she gave me a training program that I did, I guess, for 3 months last winter, that had 2 days a week of moon boarding. Campus boarding was in there, but I never did it because I really don't like campus boarding. Never had much luck with it with my shoulders. But it was 2 days a week of moon boarding, max hangs, like that Eva Lopez, you know, program on an 18 millimeter edge, and weighted pull-ups, and then some like supplementary weightlifting. You know, so I did that. I was just like, I have nothing to lose. I might as well try it. And I did that, and yeah, I saw results, like very concrete, tangible results. Not necessarily while I was doing it because I was so tired, which is just sort of part of it. But I had this project at Staunton that I'd been trying that fall and sort of started to regress on. And so that was a big part of it too. I was like, Nina, what can I do to get the strength up for that? And so I did that all winter, kind of phased out into sort of power endurance at the end, like doing 4x4s and stuff at the gym. And my first day back on the route, which was June, I almost did it, like second try. And basically I would have done it, but I was just shocked to get so high on it. Right? Yeah, I was like, I got way up through, you know, I was kind of on this outro power endurance part, and I just forgot what to do because I'd never been there before. And I just kind of like jumped off / fell and, you know, almost did it like the next try, and then came back and did it my second day. And I was like, all right, this stuff works. So I did that. And then, you know, it's a training cycle, so you want to kind of phase out of it. But I've started it again. And now I'm on my second month of it. I'll do it for another couple weeks. Then I have to take a couple weeks off from climbing. And then I'll do like 1 more month of it, and then kind of go into the spring season, hopefully with more power gains.
Nice.
Yeah.
So how about injury? Have you been relatively injury free, or any things that you can share as how you've dealt with it, if you have?
I mean, orthopedically, I think I've been super lucky. Some finger tweaks here and there that kind of go back to my early days climbing in New Mexico, like at Cochiti Mesa, which is really thin pockets. I blew out both of these. I'm not flipping you off. This is just the fingers that I hurt. You know, learning early on, like the 512s out there are all like mono roots, and I was climbing on them when I just had crap footwork because I was, you know, 16, 17 years old, and my feet would blow, and I'd be in these monos. Dang. So these fingers have remained cagey. I've never had to have shoulder surgery or anything like that. You know, some elbow tendonitis. No, I've been pretty lucky. I mean, I've tried to stay balanced with weightlifting and stuff like that. You know, I've had layoffs that have lasted a year or longer, but that's because of the neurological issues that were caused by the psychiatric medication. But in terms of orthopedic stuff, I've been pretty lucky.
So those listening, be lucky.
Yeah.
Don't get injured in the first place is probably the biggest.
I think that's number one. I mean, I think just, you know, I've always lifted weights on and off, you know, but I think lifting weights is working those antagonist muscles and not getting out of whack and not only climbing all the time. I think yoga is huge. I've done a lot of yoga in the last 6 years now. And I think that's helped me as I've kind of moved into my late 40s, is just, you know, the strengthening and the core and the flexibility and the blood flow and things that go with that. Yeah, I think not just climbing is the number one thing I would say. If you only climb, you're gonna get messed up. You know, you're just gonna get all out of balance and out of whack. Your body's gonna adapt to only do one thing, which is pulling, but there's so many other motions you need to go through in order to sort of have that healthy balance, you know, physique.
And part of that training, another sponsor spot, is mental training. So mental training, vertical mind, psychological approaches for optimal rock climbing. Jeff Ellison and I wrote this. I think it came out in 2014. You can get it on Sharp End Publishing, so sharpendbooks.com, or on Amazon. You know, what I found when I was in my 40s is that what was holding me back was more mental than physical. It wasn't that I was actually climbing in rifle a lot, and I would go at that one or two hangs forever. And what was really holding me back was kind of my mental approach. And so began experimenting and put all that knowledge into vertical mind, along with the science that Jeff has. Jeff Ellison is a psychology professor from Adams State University. So, you know, if you're looking to up your mental game, if you feel that, you know, your mental aspect may be limiting you, vertical mind, we've heard really good things about it. Obviously, Jeff and I have used the stuff in it, and many others have too. So you can find this on Amazon or on Sharp End Books. So Matt, you still do a lot of route development, right? You shared that's something that you're really passionate about. So tell us more about what kind of routes are you putting up, and why is that so much fun for you?
Why do I bother? Sorry, my kids are screaming. I mostly put up sport routes, usually close to Boulder. I mean, I haven't climbed in rifle now in 13 years or something like that. I mean, I live in Boulder, and I'm just not that psyched. I'm driving on I-70 with all the traffic and stuff. But I did bolt a lot there back in the day. But I've mainly focused my efforts on the flat irons, where you bolt on a permit system, which I actually think is fine. It's got a slow development to a sort of logical, reasonable pace, so that the routes that go in tend to be better thought out and better cared for. Up there, I think, is probably where I most enjoy putting up routes, just because I like that rock the most. It's featured, it's cool. The climbing is really, when at its best, sort of reminiscent of like the Red River Gorge or Europe, you know, where it's steep and flowy and pumpy. And there's even like tufa features and things like that up there. The sandstone's been sort of water and wind sculpted. Boulder Canyon too, to a degree. I put up routes there. There's still odds and ends left that people actually didn't bolt during the 70s, 80s, 90s, and oddies, that is still there. Sometimes hiding in plain sight, like the most obvious line on a crag in the middle just won't have been bolted. Yeah, I think, you know, the reason I do it, I mean, my day job is the editor of Climbing Magazine. I love the climbing community, but I'm actually pretty like introverted, kind of, I don't know if loner's the word, maybe. I mean, I climb with friends. I'm not just out there like weird self-belay guy all the time, but you know, I just like quiet crags. I grew up in New Mexico, which has got no population density. You know, even now, I don't think the crags down there get that busy, and they were dead empty in the 80s. I mean, like, I went to, you know, the Enchanted Tower for the first time in '87, and there was nobody there. There were just cows, you know. So my early experiences, I think, were very formative in that I just came to appreciate kind of quiet, empty crags. And basically, if you're putting up the roots, that's what you get because you're there first. So I think that's another big driver for me, especially in somewhere that's a population center like the Front Range. It's just like, oh, well, if I want to not have to wait in line for this route and I want the crag to be quiet and empty, I need to find it and create that experience myself. And then, I do enjoy seeing my routes appreciated, after they've gone up for sure. I like the community aspect of it, but that's almost secondary. And I think I'd be lying if I said that I do put up routes for the community. I mean, I do it for myself and my friends primarily, and then it's great to see people enjoy them later.
And I certainly, and we all appreciate you and everybody else who puts up a route. I've only done a few myself, but we only get to do this because people have cleaned the stuff up, sport routes, put in the bolts, pull down all the choss, so really appreciate what you're doing.
Oh yeah, no, my pleasure. It is weird, isn't it, how few climbers put up routes? I mean, I don't know. It's like some of us like doing it, and then everyone else is like, "Oh, why would I do that?" It's an interesting dichotomy.
I'll just give you my perspective. This mostly from when I worked a pretty demanding job. I was an engineering director, and I put up a couple of routes, and I'm like, "Crap, this takes a lot of time."
Yeah.
And it's really hard. And you're, some of them were in the Adirondacks back east, and you're like breathing in lichen. You got to wear a mask, and pulling off, curtains of lichen and moss. And I was like, if I have a weekend to climb, I'm going to go climb. And I really appreciated the people who did put in the time, because it's hard. It takes a lot of time.
Yeah, it doesn't have that much to do with climbing. It's got a lot more in common with like construction work or road building or something like that. It's basically like dangerous unpaid labor.
yeah, exactly.
It's fun later, when you get to, I think there's one thing that's pretty cool. Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. When you don't have time, it's a huge time suck and it's exhausting. But when you put in all that work and you spend like your first day climbing on something, you're like, wow, this is pretty, it's a cool, you feel, I don't know, in a way I feel more connected to routes I put up for some reason, maybe because of the time and labor. There's sort of an emotional investment there that makes you want to give your best performance.
Yeah, absolutely. So what does climbing mean to you now?
Oh boy, I do so much of it. I've never actually considered what it means other than it's the thing that I have to do. For me, it's still a big way. I think the two things that I love about it, the three things I think are being with friends, being outside, and the physical movement. I think those are the things that I really cherish. I mean, I go to the gym plenty. I'm in the gym at least 2 days a week, but and I love the gym too. I mean, there's like setting and holds have gotten really, really good. Like a good gym with freshly set routes can be as fun as going to a new crag sometimes, especially if you're in the gym mode. So I think that fulfills the movement part of it, the sort of kinesthetic pleasure. But yeah, I think it's those three things. And I just know when I don't have those three things, I'm miserable. So I mean, at this point, I don't know what else I would do,
So it's basically survival, right? It's
exactly.
Not having it is not an option.
It's not an option. Yeah. I mean, I'll do it as long as I can. And then I don't know what I'll do. I mean, yeah, I try to think ahead. Like if I make it to 80 and, I'm still probably be climbing in some form, but, I won't be able to do it the way I do now. Like what will I do with my days? I don't know. I mean, yeah, it's everything.
Yeah. So how about outside of climbing? What things have you learned through climbing that you apply to other aspects of your life, whether it be dealing with busyness? You were just sharing with me before we got started how you just came through this period of overwhelm. Have there been some lessons that you've taken that have been helpful for you?
I think the biggest one is that it's okay to fail. I think that's the biggest thing you learn in climbing. I think that's what climbers have in terms of resiliency that a lot of people who haven't climbed or haven't sort of pledged themselves to a sport like climbing might not necessarily know. I mean, especially in America, I think there's such a sort of warped success mentality. We need to succeed, we need to make money, we need to have a house and a car, our team needs to win. I mean, there's no winning in climbing. Even if you red point a route, you haven't won climbing. You'll never win climbing. And even if you win a competition, you're just the best on that day. You know, it's all super ephemeral and elusive. You know, but what we do when we climb is we spend most of our time failing, really. If you're pushing yourself, you mostly fail until eventually you problem solve and succeed. So I think that's probably the big lesson, that, yeah, it's okay to fail at stuff in life, you know, as long as you're trying, you're still learning.
Yeah, that's so true, right? It's really funny in climbing, especially, you know, it's not true of very many other sports. I used to be a runner,
Okay.
and unless you win the race, you don't really win, right? You're judging yourself by your time or whatever. So it's in climbing, it's very much you fail and you fail and fail, and once in a while you you know, win or succeed. And yeah, I
Right.
mean, after a while, it's like just part of the process, right? It's, you know, it's not even failure anymore. It's just, hey, that's
Just
another
learning.
burn, that's another lesson.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's pretty cool, because every route that you do, you learn something new. I mean, if you onset a route that's easier for you, you probably don't learn that much. If you onset a route that's difficult for you, you'll learn a lot about what your body can do that your mind's telling you it can't do. And if you red point a route that takes you days or weeks or months, you learn a ton. You know, you really learn about mastery. I think, in a way, you learn what mastery takes. You know, on both mental, physical, and emotional levels. Yeah, I think it's pretty cool, and I love that problem solving aspect of it too. I mean, I think it's just,
Yeah.
you know, like in my free time, I also like to do like word puzzles or play video games, especially puzzle games, because there's same thing. You're problem solving. You know, the pieces are in front of you, but you have to figure out what order to put them in. And I think that's what's pretty cool about climbing. You know, that feeling, like when you finally unlock a sequence that's been elusive, it's like the best feeling in the world.
So in climbing, what are you excited about in this next year?
Well, I have to have hernia surgery in 2 weeks, so I'll hit a little speed bump with that. I was fired up to um, kind of keep training for 2, 3 months consistently, and then have some projects I'm going to. But I think it's only like a 10-day layoff. So hopefully I'm just basically will like overtrain up until my surgery, so that I just put myself in a huge hole and then have like 10 days off and then just like get right back to it. I've got a route I've bolted on Hillbilly Rock in the Flatirons that I'm psyched to get back to. You know, the weather's been poor, so it's been too cold up there. But before that 2-foot snowstorm we had, my friend Will and I figured out all the moves on it, and I think it'll take some effort. Yeah, there's that. There's a few other routes around here I want to repeat, some things I didn't get done last year, and then we have an area too nearby where I bolted a route last year and some variations off of it that I'm very excited to try, because I could do all but one move on that route. So my goal this winter is to get strong enough to be able to do that move and then start trying to red point the route. You know, I could, one of those moves where I could kind of, you know, snap at the hold and graze it, and then my butt would pull me off. So I'm like, okay, this is a move. It's not like there's a 8-foot blank section. I'm like, this is a move that will go, but I need to be stronger. So yeah, I'd love to measure myself against that move and eventually that route.
But you know, having like some sort of an illness or a surgery or anything, it's just kind of part of the game, right? It's just, and I like what you said. Like, I'm going to do this going up to it.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, I could bemoan how it sucks, and I could bemoan this and that, but you know, it's just like, it's going to be okay, right? There's a couple months are going to go by, and I just got to do what I got to do.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's the thing, right? I mean, you do your best not to get injured, but things are going to come up, and when they do, you just try to incorporate them into what you have going on.
So, anything, we're coming up to the end of the hour. Anything else you'd like to share with people who might be listening or watching this later, that tips for them keeping in the game?
Have you ever talked to anyone about ageism in the sport?
No, I haven't.
I mean, I think that's an interesting topic that I think probably needs more exploration, and probably by people smarter than I am. But I just remember, so years ago, I was at Maple Canyon. We were at some obscure little cliff near the road, kind of down from like the minimum wall and all that stuff. And I was there with Lee Sheftel. And Lee at that point probably would have been in his late 50s or something like that. And we were there below a route. and I think I'd done it and hung the draws, and Lee had gone up once and taken a hang. We were just sort of waiting. You know, it was like a hot day. We're waiting for the sun to leave or something. And this young guy comes up with his girlfriend, and he looks at me and he looks at Lee, and then he just addresses me as if Lee's not there. He's like, "So you giving that another burn?" And I was like, "I'm not, but my friend Lee is." And then he kind of looked over at Lee, and he's like, "Oh, what?" You know, he couldn't compute that someone Lee's age would be climbing. You know, it was like a 12B or C or something like that, which is pretty easy for Lee. I mean, Lee at age 59, I think, did a 14A, right?
Yeah.
You know, so he's a formidable climber, and he remains one to this day. He's 73 now, and he's had some you know, like back hip issues, but has kept climbing hard and keeps pushing himself hard. I mean, he did the Grand Traverse when he was 70. And I just remember, like, I think Lee then proceeded to like shoe up and just hike the route in front of this guy, you know, in kind of like an FU manner, like look what I can do. But you know, it was clear that Lee had dealt with that sort of energy before, and I just remember being kind of shocked. Like, I was in my early 30s at that point, so I was still a young guy. And I'd been climbing with Lee since I was like 17, and he was close to my age now. I think he was in his early or mid 40s at that point. But I do think that's one thing that we older climbers sometimes face. I mean, I hate to say it, but there's this sort of perception that climbers, the best climbers or the only good climbers, are in their 20s, and I think it's just odd to me that in a sport that's this technical, where actually the longer you climb, sometimes the better you get, that we still sort of face that attitude. So I don't know, but I think I don't know where I'm going with this, other than I think that I would just encourage anyone who feels like they're a quote unquote older climber to just set that aside. I mean, I think for me, primarily, first and foremost, I'm a climber, right? My age is incidental. But yeah, I don't know. You know, I mean, I still, every now and then I'll get at the gym. People will be like, "How old are you?" You know, after they see me do a problem, and I'm like, does it matter? Like, you know, like, how old are you? Like, whatever. Like, if you're 23, maybe you've only been climbing for 2 years. Like, I'm 48, but I've been climbing for 33 years. Like, there's a balance, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, how have you dealt with that, or have you had to?
You know, I think the way my approach is, it sometimes it's kind of funny to be the old guy who shows up and like cruises something that other people are struggling. You know, you show up and the hat looks like you oil change with it 50 times. And, you know, my wife kind of kids me. I'm probably like the worst dressed climber that ever lived. You know, I like, these old stuff, things I had in high school. So, I mean, sometimes it's kind of fun to be the person who shows up and people are like surprised.
Right.
But I haven't faced it in a negative way, and I want to have Lee on the show. I've been picking at him a little bit, but I'd love to have him on the show and get his perspective, because he certainly, you know, is kind of what I would aspire to do when I'm 60 something. Right.
Right.
I see him cruising stuff at Rifle, and he's a fantastic role model for us.
Yeah. Yeah. And he started climbing later in life too. You know, I think Lee was in his 30s or something when he started climbing. Before then, he'd just been kind of like a hippie and a trail runner, like a barefoot hippie trail runner.
Yeah. Well, I just think the best thing to do is just show up, you know, try to ignore everybody, because nobody really cares. Right.
Right.
Nobody else really cares. I mean, they might care only in they're comparing how you do versus how they do.
Right.
And at the end of the day, they don't care. You show up, do the best you can, and it's really fun to be that old person who shows up and cruises something.
It kind of is. I mean, there's times when I get a perverse satisfaction out of it. When someone's vibing me at the gym and it's some young guy and I know I can burn him off, I'm like, I'm going to burn you off. I'm going to do this to you because you asked for it.
That's right. You remember, you invited me.
Yeah, you invited me. Exactly. Otherwise, I would have just ignored you. We could have gone our separate ways, but you put it out there, so now you're getting it.
Yeah. All right, Matt. Well, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. It's been fantastic. I've really enjoyed it. I've learned a lot, and I believe others are going to learn a lot. So again, really appreciate you taking your time today.
Oh yeah, my pleasure, Don. Thank you for having me on. This was fun.
All right. Well, take care, man.
All right, you too.
Peace out.
See ya.